Yes, Carsten. Thank you very much for this introduction. As you mentioned a lot of things, and indeed I'm working in a lot of fields and try to combine them, from Medea, Pocahontas to Jimi Hendrix and all the cinema and so on and so on. One thing I would add to what you said, male fantasies, Männerfantasien was and in many respects a book that hadn't existed before in that sort in its use of pictures. You can see in this book that my thinking comes and perception of reality very much from the cinema, not from so much from philosophy or literature. And I had piles of images, pictures and so on collected through the years of 5 years of working on that book. And after, when I was ready, I spent another half a year just going into libraries looking for pictures and on every sort of level, and then had the book when it was published in a way of montage of these pictures. There was not the usual way. You have an illustration, there you speak of this soldier, and then you have the picture of the brigade and so on. Or mostly then it was a picture parked in the middle of the book, 10 or 20 pages, and which I always hated because it disrupted and everything you did there. So the picture were put always on top of a page, never in the middle, never down, like in the cinema. Then a whole page, and there are parts of speaking about Freikorps people or fascist soldiers, and then putting a comic of Robert Crumb on the parallel side, to see, and the reader has to do this, making those connections in these montage. And meanwhile, some people are working on that level with pictures, but that was absolutely new in 1977, and it never could have happened if I had published this book in one of the big companies like Rowohlt or Suhrkamp or so. They were not used to work with authors like that. It just worked in a small company of friends who came from the leftist political side, and I had the possibility there to work there for 3 weeks or 4 and on this montage. I was changing the pictures again and making it the other way, and that doesn't work and so on. And till now, if when I did the Hendrix biography with Rowohlt, in 2 days time, to make the montage of the pictures, and now it's dated to then and then it's published. You have no chance, even as an author that is quite well known. And so I prefer till now to work with companies like that, which came from underground companies and grew then, and really to have space for doing what you want, and not getting a book in your hand you discussed afterwards, which often is the case with authors, I know. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you for your invitation. Aziz is ill, you hear I'm a little on the same trip, and I hope my voice will get through. This book you mentioned, The Laughing of the Killers, Breivik and others, and it has religion, as you said, in the background. The focus is on the laughing of the killers, and which I first realized in male fantasies and several accidents in Ruhr Valley where Freikorps soldiers killed workers and working women, and this laughing appears. But in the course of the years, it became more and more evident to me from many places in the world, Guatemala and Rwanda, Indonesia, and the German laughing SS people in World War II, and so on, that I made the decision when I had a talk on Breivik, this Norwegian killer, and people decided or wanted to make a book out of it, and I said, okay, I'll focus on this laughter, and but that is in the second line today, but we will speak about it. But just first, sorry, to give you, I start this Breivik part, it's called Laughter 1, with the description after he had killed on the 22nd of July in 2011 on the small and Norwegian island Utoya, 69 people of the AUF, it's the youth organization of the Social Democratic Party of Norway. They had their summer camp, which they have every year there. He went there and shot the 69 young people. And when he surrendered to the police at clock 18:24, he introduced himself as commander of the anti-communistic Widerstandsbewegung Norwegens. One of the survivors, Emma Martinovic, 18, she escaped the killer through jumping into the water. And she tells how the laughter of the killer accompanied her when she was panically swimming away from that island. Quote, behind us we could still hear the shooting, the screams, the laughter of the bastard as he shot, and his shout to us, you won't get away. So noted by a reporter of the English Guardian, who was the first there to interview those kids. Emma Martinovic escaped from death. There are several of those similar descriptions in the process that he was shouting, and one says like a football player who has made his goal and said, ah! So he went with his gun and shot. Okay, these people, I think you know something about him, don't you? Yes. And so I will just summing up some. Yes, the first thing, what has he to do with religion? Before court, in the process, he says he did this killing mainly that people would listen to him and read his internet manifest of 1,500 pages he had put there just 2 days or the day before the shooting, and 300 or so, 8 addresses he had sent it there, and he said nobody would read this of the right-wing crazy Norwegian who says Europe is dying from Islam, from letting Islamic people into the Christian regions, and that's his mission. He describes himself as a missionary in that way, and with 3 anti-things. Anti-Islam, maybe it's not the first. Looking closer, you see the second 2 are more important, anti-feminine and anti-Marxist. He says Norway is ruled by feministic, Marxistic women, and which have fun in giving passports and so on to Islamic immigrants, and make love to them also, which he hates especially. And there will be a time, 20 years or so, he says he's always working with statistics. That's one of the important points before court. He's not sitting there and glowing with hate. He's sitting there very cool and arguing. He takes one statistic after the other out of his documents. It says in the year of 2045 people who are born in Norway will be, and fewer than immigrants from elsewhere, especially Islam. There was a German book by an author named Sarrazin with the title Deutschland schafft sich ab. Germany puts itself to an end, down, and that's what he says with Norway. Norway puts itself down and to an end, and that's the case in all Europe. And there are only very few people, and there comes his organization. He states to belong to the so-called Knight Templars, and Knight with K, not the Knight, but nicht die Nacht, aber der Ritter. The Knight Templars, KT, he writes the KT organization, and he says he's one of the founders, the new founders of it, and it is a very old organization, die sogenannten Tempelritter. They date from the Crusades from 11th, 12th century and in Europe, and those knights going to the so-called, they call it the Holy Country, das Heilige Land. Nobody was speaking of a holy country before. It's an invention of the Crusaders of the 11th and 12th century. To Jerusalem there, trying to keep it, but then they were defeated and had to go back by Muslim groups, Muslim troops, and the Turkish and other people had fleets in the Mediterranean, and they often went to the west. The Osmanian Empire, tried, it was this, Hungary played a special role in that, better than me. And the so-called Tempelritter, they defeated one of the Turkish fleet in the 12th century, and then they got from the Pope there this island of Malta as a gift for them and their special monastery to put there and live there and so on. And the Knight Templars today, die Tempelritter, they still have some nests on Malta, and it was a little funny that the judge, the Norwegian judge, and I don't have her name now, and in mind, Christiansen also, and she didn't believe him. She said that's an idea of fantastic idea, this temple, this Knight Templars, but there was a Norwegian journalist, Karin Fetland, who had become famous by writing about the massacre in Beslan, I think, where Russian troops conquered a school and killed with Geiseln so many people, and she had written about that, and then she was a specialist for massacres like that, and she was asked to deal with Breivik, and then she did, and she went to Malta and spoke with some of those Knight Templars. One of they come from Great Britain, from the right-wing Great Britain groups mostly. One calls himself Richard Lionheart, and he talked to him, and Richard Lionheart told her just the same things as Breivik has in his program for the cleaning of the change of Norway again to a Christian country. And there is a program, the first, and that we will see that in several cases. The first is rules for women. That women are not allowed, that's what Breivik writes in his manifest, and this Richard Lionheart and the other Maltesian also tell it in the same way. They are not allowed to get into the police, they are not allowed to get in the army, they are not allowed to get to the university before they don't have two children, born two children. These children are taken by the state or some Christian institution and are educated there. And then when they go to the university, they have to stop at the grade of bachelor. No woman is allowed to become professor. and there are only 4 races, as they talk, allowed to live in Europe. That are German rules, Germanic, Slave, and Slavish, slave, and Celtic, and one more which are living in Spain somewhere. The rest has to go out, has to leave Europe, and therefore have to be put into camps at the edge, and then back to the rest of the world, wherever we can put them, and then Europe will be in the state to get rid of this craziness of democracy, of democratic states, and this idea of people are equal and men and women are equal. That's rubbish and has to disappear. And if some of you, some of the more clever critics, the first they said to this program was, that sounds like an Islamic patriarch somewhere behind in Iraq, what you say about women and not being equal and the role of religion and so on. Okay, that's the first point where you can see that the sort of faith from where you speak things like that can be exchanged. You can't say the same things from an Islamic point of view or from an Hinduistic point of view, male point of view, like a Christian male point of view. You know, it's not just, there are sorts of Christianity, several sorts. This sure male rule is his main point. And from there, and therefore especially he needs his knight temperance, this organization. He says, I'm not acting as an individual. I do it in the name of this organization. And that means in the name of a God behind there and a certain faith. And therefore, he says to the court, you cannot condemn me. You are not the people who are able to make a decision or Urteil. What is Urteil? Judgment, yes, about what I did. No? Because I'm acting in the name of this super Christian Knight Templar power. And that's one point that all the killers I'm writing about in this book are speaking from. They all of them have that organization. And if the SS people have their master race, and the IS killers with their beheading, they do it in the name of Allah or a certain sort of Islamic faith. Other ones are to be killed also. And the people in Rwanda, they have no ethnic reason because they are nearly the same so-called race, black, but they had different social positions before, and the Tutsi were said to have worked with the Belgians together in colonial time, and now the Tutu who were below them turned it the other way around. And in that name of anti-colonialism, they had also the right to kill the other ones without process. You know, in Rwanda it was for weeks they killed nearly 1 million. On that level of, it was no religious argumentation and combined with their killing. In killing Charlie Hebdo in Paris, it was Allahu Akbar. It was in the name of Allah. The IS people kill in the name of Allah. Breivik kills in the name of what he calls Christianity. The conquerors, the European around Cortes, Hernan Cortes, killed in the name of Catholicism. And some of you will know that in Cortes and the Spaniards, they were not just landing there with a ship and going with their guns through the Indians and shooting them. No, they made the offer of for them for becoming Catholic. The first group of girls, 20, they got as a present after their first one battle, and they were they got this water. And the next day they were Catholic women, and they were married to the Spanish officers. And that's the reason we have Mexico today, this way of mixture they did. And when there was a village, when they went against Tenochtitlan, which didn't cooperate with them, and then they said, "We'll show you, we'll show how we are supreme to you," and that's because we have the right God on our side. And he made with Malinche, who learned very quickly Spanish and making the dolmetsching. And with them, they were always told, and they were not just killed, but you are killed because of your false gods in the name of our right God. Cortés never made his killings without that. And many of you know the Aztec villages and people and worked with him together because they were suppressed by the Aztecs from Tenochtitlan. They were not just one homogene Indian population or so it was rather easy for him to get this support by many of them, but who didn't. Many were killed also, as we all know, but always with this religious, the whole world then, they had just, 1492, the rest of the Jews had been expelled from Spain, and the rest of the Muslims too, and to northern Africa back. Spain was a pure Catholic country since 1492, and their aim was for the rest of the world, it had to be the same, had to become the same. Catholic in that way, Catholic faith. And okay, now we can, or you can think about what did Cortés or other conquistadores believe from this by themselves? Did they believe and they had the only right God in whose name they did their deeds, but when you see how they acted there, then you saw it was not the case, because they worked with tricks, as the English conquistadors did 100 years later in Virginia when they landed in America. Thomas Harris describes how they were asked by the Indians in North America, and when they saw a sextant and compass and things like that, and where did you get this from? The needles that made this and showed to the North Pole, and they were, and did you produce it by yourselves, or did you get that from your God? And what did the English say? It's a gift from our God. And Cortés, and when you saw the Aztecs were in fear of their horses, the Aztecs had no horses. There were no horses in America before the Europeans arrived there, and they said, well, and when the horses did this and got up, and why do? And they always said, yes, that's because the will of our God. They is angry about you. And at one meeting, and it's described by one of his soldiers, by Bernal Diaz, who made a big report about those conquering years of Mexico and South America. They put a canvas there, and behind the canvas there were the female horses, and on this side, seen by the Indians, die Hengste, the male. And when the female horses, after the canvas came, the horses, they got furious and up, and it was the same thing. It is our God speaking through the horses. You shall change your belief, and things like you see from there that they were strategic tricksters. They didn't believe their religious things in that way, which they could have probably. So on another way of discussion, speaking about the European, the individual, the person, the subject, the so-called subject we have now, more or less, and that we work on a way of a split person, which in psychoanalysis around 1900 is a horror diagnosis. A split person, schizophrenic or a double identity, things like that. All the early cinemas working with those fear and pictures like that. And I think till now we have a sort of social subject that is split in many ways, but without being diagnosed as ill or so. But it's a normal way of being like Cortez. One hour in the morning he's religious, then the next hour he's a strategic guy and with his plans. Then he gets on horse fighting, then several more. What we do and make our leaving at home and with the children, then having date on the phone and with a lover, then going to the bureau and making some börsen, some financial things, then giving money for starving children in India or in the Congo, and then at having lunch with your team. Everybody's equal, but at 2 o'clock you tell 2 of them they have to leave because of the company has to put down its personal, and 4 or 5 things more. And the normal person, that's what I state, functions like that today. And we are 10 persons like that, and no single subject. And that's the crucial point about it. No part we are changed from one to the other, like opening a door and being another person then, without having a bad conscience or things like that about it. It's no suffering on that split, but a split as a social technique, and one of the ways that we can stand or keep up with all the horror that is in the world and that we know. And if we were connected with that all day, and we would probably break down. And so we jump from split. I think these Renaissance persons, like Cortez, they start with it from our cultures. I think is based in, and that has to do with the technological development that has happened till then. So, and after the world is perspective, and the globe is into squares and lines, and the sky also, and it's all on the way to atomic small parts, smaller, and sequencing it. And I think it has this result in our psyche, in our body structure, which are based in many points on those technologies. And so we are not natural born people or so, but technologically produced. So that's one. I mentioned the body, and coming back from that to what is the fun of those people, laughing while killing. We have that also in the Cortez soldiers. When they put their dogs on the Indians and cut them in pieces and so on. It's reported through history, and can start with Homeros and Elias, where you have things like that. So that's not absolutely a new thing in history, but we have it in a mass in the 20th century and in the 21st. And what happens there? Why and from where comes this fun? And that's one part I try to describe in male fantasies, and the psychoanalytical background there is that when I dealt with the descriptions of the killings of these pre-fascist, or they called themselves the first soldiers of the Third Reich, later when the Third Reich was there, so understood themselves as early fascist fighters for that Dritte Reich. Ich mache mal gerade einen Schluck trinken. They were very proud of their deeds when putting down the German socialist insurrections, Ruhr Valley and workers, and after Kapp-Putsch, who grew up to an army of 50,000 armed soldiers. They hadn't put their weapons from World War I away. They were still in the cellars and so on. And social democratic government didn't know how to put them back again. And then they hired these so-called Freikorps, this fascist guys, to put that socialistic Aufstand. Insurrection. I always have resurrection in mind. Therefore, that's not insurrection. From these descriptions, which we got from our friend Monika and me, and historian who worked about those insurrections in the Ruhr Valley and in Germany from 1918 to 1920 after Kapp-Putsch. And there were all these descriptions of those Freikorps guys killing workers and women with getting close to them with a bayonet and getting into their bodies and making them a bloody mash. Or another perception they wanted to have when there was a demonstration of workers and not with weapons and unarmed. When they shot into that, everybody tries to leave the place and to get away. And some are lying there who got a bullet. And there is a situation where the soldiers, they burst into laughter. And especially these two, this bloody mash and this empty place, and having a fiesta in that moment. And the persons Erhard Lukas knew, he didn't know how to cope with this. He said, I don't understand this. And from that much I know about psychoanalysis, I can't describe this right. I only can describe it, but I have no theoretical knowledge about it. And he asked my wife and me, because he knew we had to do with psychoanalysis before in the German STS, and Monika had started working in the children's psychiatry in the university clinic, and asked us whether we could find something there which would make sense. And trying to deal with it with Freudian terminology was no way. You could have some parts where Freud is speaking about violence, or people like Zadga, or some other, not very many, very few. You had these descriptions, on the other side you had the psychoanalytical texts, and it didn't work together. It didn't make really clear what was happening there, what was this fun of killing. And then, yes, after I had worked 2 or 3 years with those things and had piles of material and so on, and Monika in the clinic, youth hospital, university clinic, and there was a new book appearing by Margaret Mahler. It was called Symbiosis and Individuation, or Individuation and Symbiosis, that way around, Symbiose und Individuation, the psychic birth of man, die psychische Geburt. das Menschen, and they read it in the hospital and showed it to me and said, look at this, maybe that can help you out of this. I felt myself at a barrier, you know, with that thing. And what Margaret Mahler, she's perhaps some of you know, she's Hungarian. You know? She was born here and studied in Germany, later married, went to England and then to the United States, where she became famous as one of the first children's psychoanalysts. And she worked with very disturbed young children, and whom she called psychotic children, which is now used a little differently in psychoanalysis, but that was her word. And she described situations of them when they exploded, when they got under pressure, when their countenance fell down, what she then called fragmented body, a fragment body. They acted very in the same way, and how I had seen those soldiers in my papers. And when things came near them, the soldiers, they were like Breivik, and when he got near or women in a certain way, which he wanted to distance, he blamed his sister and mother for having venereal diseases by too many sexual contacts and so on and so on. Shame on the family and things like that, and all those things the Freikorps soldiers write about. They write about, perhaps and often, about there was a workers' demonstration, and in the first row there were women, and when they came near, those women were armed, the so-called Flintenweiber. They had guns under their skirts and so on. And Erhard Lucas had worked very well on those things, and he could prove from that material that it were all inventions. There were no women with weapons under their skirts in the workers' groups. And it was just in the writings of those soldiers. And then they exploded and had to go near them and kill them, or put them out of the way, or like empty place, put bullets in them, and then they disappear. And the children Mahler describes when something happened that disturbed them on the table, this was not on that place, and like the last time, and this, then they exploded in this, producing this empty place and perception, or putting things to mash and destroying them, trying to destroy them totally, what the soldier in the action did with this bloody mash of the bodies and perception. And she calls that hallucinatoric and conglomerations of perception. In German it's halluzinatorische Wahrnehmungsidentitäten. Does she use identities and hallucinatoric? But that's exactly the same way the soldiers acted in their killings, was half hallucinatoric and half mixing persons up with other persons. And that's what all of you know in certain situations when you are angry with somebody or arguing, and you say to you or you this or that. It's not often not directed exactly, but another person is involved, maybe a mother, a father, a friend, somebody else, and you mix the persons up in those states of mind, of perception, halluzinatorische Wahrnehmungsidentitäten, and that opened a way and for me to describe these actions of those soldiers when they were disturbed by what they were always furious about, because and that's one point I also learned out of that book, that those children tried to get into a countenance, homeostase, balance, a bodily balance with themselves, and they are all they are disturbed in a way that meant they were treated in a cruel way, beaten or left alone or something like that, that they never really came out of a negatively felt symbiosis with a bad mother or a disturbing mother. And what they were trying, and that's the political then rule those soldiers make of the world, to make out of symbiosis hierarchies, where everybody and everything is exactly at its place. It's one of the main fascist acts, I think, to make order in the world or to rule the world, making hierarchies out of symbiosis. And these soldiers, okay, there's the commander, then the next, and what the proletariat did, the workers in the Ruhr Valley, putting the world from feet to head, because who ruled? The most of them came from the country, patriarchal families, Junker and big estates, etc. They have to rule, they are above, then there's the army, then there are the priests and so on, the teachers, and the worker has to be down. And the worker who wants who says, I become the ruler of my factory, we do it by ourselves, and they totally put every hierarchy into the wrong way. So they felt themselves, in the way I described before, as absolutely being right, in the right to kill them, because those people put the world round the wrong way. Mostly not religiously there, but some of them had a god, but they replaced it in the run of the 20 years, 30s with race, with master race. We are members of the master race, and then expanded this, and so this killing of the workers inside Germany was their experimental way to doing the same with Europe afterwards, in World War II. Because one of the main clauses of those people said, the war is not over as long as we've lost. So that's the sentence from which World War II starts. They had to, after they had done it in Germany, trade union houses were closed in 1933. 1st of May 1933, then that was over. So okay, they also had their big organization in which name they could kill them. I have a part in the book here about German prisoners of war, which were in English camps, 1943, 1944. And the English, as you can imagine, put microphones in their rooms and listened what they were talking, and typed it. Those folders were published in the 1990s. And one German historian, Carsten Neitzel, found them in the British Library there, and looked them through and made a book out of it. And what did those soldiers? And the British wanted to hear war and enigmas, riddles and things they didn't know. And maybe they got some, I don't know, but what they got very much was the laughter of the German soldiers. And when talking among them and feeling alone, then they told the other ones how they had fun in killing Jews and fucking Jewish women, and at the edge of der Grube, was is this lab? Pit, yes. And then shooting them down, and then there's one officer, he said, oh, it was so horrible. 9 of them were laughing and I couldn't stand it. But it's all there. After the war, they said nobody remembered and nobody knew and nobody was part of it. But when being only with themselves, it was even after the killings, and the laughter still appeared, and without any feeling of guilt or so. So From those some cases, I will one more mention. Perhaps you may have the opportunity next time, or had the opportunity to see the films of Joshua Oppenheimer. He's an American filmmaker. He's nearly 40 years old now. He started in Indonesia some years ago to make a film about some gummi, rubber plantation, and where workers tried to make trade unions and to get some workers right through, and the Indonesian army and the factory owners and tried to shoot them and put them down. And then he realized that there in 1965, 66, there had been a big killing action similar to the Rwanda action in the 90s, and where Indonesian Freikorps-like people, and some of the army, but very many of them freelancing people, and Kleinkriminelle, what is the small criminal on that way, they killed about 800,000 at least communists in Indonesia. Indonesia was going to get the biggest communist party after China in that years, and they feared they could get to power, and they made some horrible films what the communists are doing and so on. And Joshua Oppenheimer, he met them when filming in Indonesia, and he realized because they were never punished, who had done those killings, and they were still proud of it, that he got them before his camera, and they were speaking very, very openly and very proudly about what they did then. And the first film is called The Act of Killing, and he realizes there, and that's very crazy, and you see it when you see the film, that those guys, many of them were in cinemas, and who tore the tickets, controlled the tickets, things like that. And they had loved American cinema, and tried to dress themselves as gangsters and with those hats like Edward G. Robinson and people like that. And they tell in that film that they learned there, and they were shooting the communists, and there was so much blood, and it was on the roof, on the veranda of the cinema, the blood ran down, and then they saw in American film these mafia killing ways with a your throat, and then that solved the blood problem, and they all show that in that film, and they speak about and laugh about and are dancing, and some of them who ordered it then still were in power, and they were so eager telling it because they had a chance to act as those actors they had themselves felt to be. And the only reason that they can name now in 2006 why they wanted to kill the communists, they said it was the communists wanted to put American cinema out of Indonesia. So that was their fight against another religion. This religion, American cinema, was, and I realized it first in my life in that way, and what those American cultural products did in countries of nearly analphabetic things, and with nearly no reading background or things like that. They were absolutely planiert in their mind by those things. When we got American cinema in 1956 or so on, we had German literature and music and things and everything in mind, so we could experience that as a new sort of freedom. For us, that was anti-fascistic. For those Indonesian guys, it was just the other way around. It made them killing fascists, the same films. And just to mention that aside. And there's another one, the second is the Look of Silence, which Joshua Oppenheimer did, where one of the brothers of the victims then tries to find the people who did it and speaks to them, and that is still so much dangerous there now that he is undercover, has changed his identity in the film. He can't show often up there. So still, what happened there. You can become a killer like that, and a laughing killer, and the religion then in the Cold War was anti-communism. In so many countries, Guatemala and so on, later Chile, and people were killed in great masses in the name of this anti-communism. So there are examples enough to see. You can see that religion can be used in the way for justifying those things and for making them real and just in the name of God, and so on and so on. But as well, other things like racism, economical interests, and so on can work like that. But now, to come to the last point in this, one before, there is a magazine of Süddeutsche Zeitung, German, one of the leading papers, liberal papers in Germany. They often speak with people who change the side from. Here they have one Dominik Schmitz, who was 6 years among the Salafists, this most popular branch of Islamic people in Germany. And they ask him, so he says what many sociologists say. And there are people who go to Syria from Germany to the jihad. They are people who have some breakdowns in their past. They have they haven't learned much, and no right education, no perspective, and so on and so on. Okay, but then when somebody says, here you can help your brothers and sisters in Syria, you can get up into the hierarchy very quick, and you can be a commander or a judge or some people in the community, in Stadtrat. And if you are dying, then you get into paradise with those 72 virgins. And then here the interviewer asks him, this 75 virgins in paradise, do you and your Salafist brothers really take that seriously? And then he says, and I was very surprised that he says that, that is a real imagination. In paradise you get sex with virgins, and in hell you will be fed with blood and eiter, and you will be burned, and an angel comes and puts a stone on your head all the time. That's what we believed, he said, after 6 years in the Salafists. Okay, we can speak about that. But here is also Süddeutsche Zeitung, some research done in the last months. It was published in this text you find it on edge.org in the net. The book of Michael McCullough, Beyond Revenge, the Evolution of the Forgiveness Instinct. He's the author of this article, and he puts those last researches together, and there for me are two very important points. He says, this research says that among 7 people today, 5 are doing something in the frame of their religion, of one of the big world religions. And what's common to them, that they not only speak to their followers, to their own religion, but they also care for the acting of those who are not belonging to their own religious community. So they take the right for them, of all those 5 religions, to speak for other people, even those who are not religious at all. Second point, they use this way to make rules for the other ones, mainly to give a structure to their own social surroundings after their own imaginations, especially concerning 3 points: sex, marriage, and reproduction, making children. The sexual strategy of the last thousands of years of the most world religions, mostly coming to power in agrarian societies, they were based or are based on monogamy, having a religious sittsam life, and making a stigmatization of sex outside of marriage, mostly to get heritage clear, to know from whom the children are, and so on and so on, when you give your acres to the next ones. So that was a study with 16,000 persons in 56 different countries, and all of them had the main point that sexuality, just following opportunities and promiscuity, they were absolutely aversive against that, and that the rules for women were much stronger and heavier than those for men. Third point. The next point, that they were very cruel with punishments of wrong sex, and then, or women not behaving in the way they should, then other criminality. Theft or not paying taxes, and driving without license, drinking while driving, etc., not punished like that, not comparably like those 3: sex, marriage, reproduction, especially the social behavior of women. Okay, and then when we see Boko Haram and the guys in Iraq, which are making Yazidi girls pregnant just to put them down and to buy them and make slaves out of them, and so on and so on. And that I think gives to think something to this point, that a certain way of religious behavior has, and this study is widened. The last is with 300,000 people in different countries, which are all on that point. They came to the same conclusion. Yeah? People who are putting their acting, their social acting, mainly under this law of some commandments, of religious commandments, all in the world, and are suppressing freer sexuality and uncontrolled reproduction and behavior of women. So that this Anders Behring Breivik fits very well into it. You can say he's no Christian at all, but he acts in the name of a religion. So, and from history, okay, that's I forgot to say that, but that's what you all know. All religions in the state where they are new and where they have to fight against another religion which is there in that country where they want to come to power. On that level, all religions were cruel and violent in suppressing others. And when they have come to power, they can drive it back in a way as we now have it in Middle Europe in most countries, or especially Scandinavia, which are still doing their laws and justice in the name of God, but they don't believe in it and they don't act in it in their daily life, and the church has not the power to rule into everything, and people who don't want to be ruled by the church are more or less, yes, absolutely free in our societies, or they can be free if they want. But religion that wants to come to power is violent. And yeah, caliphate wants to make all the world caliphate, not only Syria and northern Iraq. And so there the connection, or Boko Haram, and who kill people who are making music, and they sure want to put Africa, if they can, under this flag. And there is really an absolute connection between religion and killing, and violent killing. Thank you for listening so long.